At my wife's funeral, I stood alone in the rain. No one else cared enough to show up. I am Oliver, 50 years old, and I watched them lower Martha's casket into the frozen ground at Mountain View Cemetery in Vancouver. The chapel was empty. Just me, a young minister who barely knew her, and the crushing weight of 45 years of memories trapped in a pine box. Pulled out my phone, out of habit, and scrolled. Amber, 36, posting a photo in front of a Christmas tree at some boutique hotel in Whistler. Designer ski jacket, glass of champagne, caption reading, living my best life. Self-care isn't selfish, 4 hours ago. And Ryan, 42, shaking hands with some developer at a ribbon cutting in Toronto. Smiles, deals, business as usual. 6 hours ago, they weren't here. They didn't care. The wind whipped through my coat, dripping rain down my sleeves. My chest tightened. They thought I was just an old man, broken by grief, someone they could ignore, someone they could forget. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, the doorbell rang at 9. I had been awake since. Preacher, the house was quiet without her. I opened the door. There they were, Ryan and Amber, not in black. Ryan in a charcoal suit, polished and expensive, the kind you wear to close a deal, not mourn your mother. Amber in cream-colored athleisure, hair in a high ponytail, carrying 2 Tim Hortons cups and a paper bag of bagels. Morning. Dad, Ryan said, stepping past me like he owned the place. Amber set a coffee in front of my chair. Double. Just how you like it, she said with a tight, practiced smile. That small gesture sat in my stomach like a stone. I looked at them. At their eyes, their clothes, their distractions. At the children I raised. And I realized they had no idea what was waiting for them. The doorbell rang at exactly 9:15 a.m., slicing through the quiet house like a sudden crack of lightning. I had been awake since 4, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft tick of the clock, the occasional drip of rain from the eaves, the hollow silence that had replaced Martha's laughter. The house felt too big, too empty, as though her absence had stretched the walls outward, leaving me alone in a cavern of memories. I opened the door. There they were, Ryan, in a charcoal gray suit that smelled faintly of expensive cologne, walked past me like he owned the place. His tie was perfectly straight, shoes polished, demeanor practiced, everything about him screaming corporate power and self-importance. Amber followed, cream-colored athleisure clinging to her like armor, hair in a high ponytail that swished with each step. She carried a paper bag with bagels and 2 Tim Hortons cups, placing one precisely in front of my chair. Double. Just how you like it, she said with that measured, corporate perfect smile that somehow made my chest ache. I didn't respond. I only studied them, the children I had raised, the ones I had thought would be my comfort after Martha was gone. Their clothes, their distractions, the casualness of their voices. They were not here to mourn. They were here to perform. Their small gestures, their carefully measured attempts at kindness, sat in my stomach like stones. Ryan cleared his throat. About yesterday, Dad. I know we weren't there. He paused, measuring my expression, like a lawyer gauging a jury. It was the Young Street development closing. 3 years of work. $40 million. I couldn't just walk away. You understand, right? I let the silence stretch. I didn't answer. He looked at me, expecting gratitude, forgiveness, understanding. The boy I once knew, who had climbed onto my lap with scraped knees and whispered secrets, had been replaced by this polished man who measured every word, every gesture, every moment by profit and performance. I remembered all the hours Martha and I had spent supporting him, the first loans we co-signed, the sleepless nights we endured believing in him. And now, standing here, he tried to twist that devotion into justification for missing his mother's funeral. Amber finally looked up from her phone, the screen reflecting in her eyes like some hollow mirror. "And my event, Dad," she said, her voice light, casual, as if she were reading bullet points from a presentation. It was huge. Brand partnership, contracted, couldn't cancel. They would have sued me. She tilted her head, as if seeking approval from the ceiling, from me, from the universe. Approval she didn't need, because she thought herself above reproach. I watched her hands, the way they moved over the bagel bag, the cups, the way she didn't really see me, didn't see the grief in the room, didn't see Martha's absence in the air between us. At 36, Amber had become a construct of filters, sponsorships, and self-importance. The daughter who once scraped her knees on the driveway, who had whispered secrets under blankets late at night, was gone. In her place, a careful, polished projection of success, of influence, of social media perfection. Ryan sipped his coffee, oblivious to the tension, his eyes flicking toward the living room, toward the house, toward the memory of his mother that filled every corner with the scent of cinnamon rolls, the echo of laughter, the soft warmth that had nurtured him into this man. Mom would have understood, he added, like a rehearsed line from a play he thought I'd applaud. I didn't move. I didn't respond. I let the words hang there, thick in the morning air, like smoke from a fire that refused to die. Amber's phone buzzed. She checked it. A message from some brand manager or social media contact. She smiled faintly, eyes not on me, not on Ryan, not on the coffin we had just buried in the ground yesterday, just on her carefully curated digital world.
The smell of her coffee, the paper bag of bagels, the faint trace of Ryan's cologne, all of it made the house feel alien, cold, wrong. I looked at them both. The children I had raised, the ones I had expected to stand with me, to grieve with me, to honor the woman who had given them life, had instead arrived to measure, to perform, to claim, to calculate. They had no idea what was waiting for them. And I let them think that breakfast, that hollow offering of coffee and carbohydrates, was enough to smooth over yesterday. I poured my own coffee, black, no sugar, letting the heat seep into my hands. I watched them carefully, studying gestures, timing, expressions, the way their eyes flitted over the kitchen, the countertops, the cabinets Martha had polished for decades. Everything they touched was alien to them. Everything they brought, all their carefully measured effort, was hollow. They thought this was reconciliation, connection, a return to some semblance of family, but they were wrong, and I was watching. Before I continue, tell, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. Ryan leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming lightly on the kitchen table, as if the wood itself could tell him the answers he wanted. Dad, I mean, yesterday. It wasn't personal, he said, voice smooth, practiced. The tone of a man defending a quarterly report rather than mourning a mother. It's just the closing. Years of work, contracts, investors. Everything rides on this deal. You understand, don't you? I did understand. I understood the hours, the meetings, the spreadsheets, the corporate handshakes. But I also understood absence. I understood loss. And I understood betrayal. The house smelled faintly of coffee, of bagels, of cheap cologne and antiseptic soap, but it did not smell of Martha. Not a hint of her cinnamon rolls, her perfume, the warmth of her presence that had always made this place home. Amber tilted her head, scrolling through her phone as she spoke, eyes flitting back up only to punctuate her words. And my event, Dad? It was a major launch. Brand partnership. Millions at stake. I had to be there. I couldn't just cancel. Legal issues, contracts, they would have sued. You know how it is. Her words weren't an apology. They were a shield, a way to justify absence, to make themselves feel right while the funeral went on without them.
I sat quietly, letting them speak, listening to every excuse, every calculated justification. Each word landed in my chest like a small hammer, driving deeper the truth I already knew. They had chosen everything else over their mother, everything else over me, everything else over the family we had built. Ryan's eyes flicked toward the living room, toward the pictures on the wall. Martha's smiling face in every frame, frozen in time, the warmth of her life captured and taunting him. He didn't flinch. He didn't seem to care. He only spoke faster, smoother, like rehearsing a speech he'd given 1,000 times. You have to understand, Dad, you raised me for this. You taught me how to build, how to negotiate, how to grow. Everything I am, it's because of you. I studied him, taking in the polished suit, the gleam of the watch on his wrist, the faint smell of cologne masking something deeper, something insincere. I thought about the boy who used to climb onto my lap after a nightmare. The boy who once hugged his mother when she was sick. The boy who had held my hand at his first day of school. That boy was gone. In his place, a man who measured life in profit, margins and opportunity, costs. Amber smiled faintly, tapping her phone again, glancing at a notification from some sponsor, some deal, some event that mattered more than the woman we buried yesterday. We're not heartless. Dad, she said, almost pleading, as if her polished tone could make her absence okay. We love you. We love Mom, but life doesn't stop for anyone. Contracts, launches, work. Everything is timed. You know that. I nodded slowly. My chest burned, not from grief. Not from anger, though anger was there, but from disbelief. The children I had loved, nurtured, guided, they had transformed into strangers. Hollow, calculated, indifferent, and yet they didn't see it. They didn't see the depth of their own selfishness. They thought a bagel and a coffee, a few measured words, could erase yesterday, could erase Martha, could erase the truth of who they had become. I poured another cup of black coffee, letting the steam rise between us. I watched their faces, every twitch, every glance, every subtle inflection. I remembered Martha's green eyes, the way she would see right through excuses, the way she would know truth from deception. And I realized she would have hated their excuses. She would have been furious. And for the first time since yesterday, a small, cold satisfaction spread through me. They had no idea what was coming. The silence stretched. The house felt smaller, tighter, sharper. Every laugh track of memory, every ghost of Martha's voice, every echo of a moment we had shared in this kitchen pressed against their presence. And I understood one thing with absolute clarity. They were in my house, in my kitchen, in my life, thinking they were in control, and they were wrong. The morning stretched on, thick and suffocating, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I poured another cup of black coffee, the steam curling upward like a warning, and watched them move through Martha's kitchen with the practiced ease of intruders in a home they barely respected. Ryan reached for the sugar bowl without asking, his movements confident, automatic. Amber opened a cupboard and rifled through the plates, as if searching for the perfect angle for a social media post rather than preparing breakfast for her father. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift in posture spoke volumes. They had forgotten, or perhaps never understood, that a home carries memory, carries life, carries respect. I decided to let the silence do some of the work. Words had failed so far. Perhaps observation would be more telling. I deliberately left a half-empty jar of Martha's homemade preserves on the counter, the label slightly askew. Amber's fingers brushed against it, pausing briefly, then moved on without a glance at me. Ryan, on the other hand, muttered, "Still keeping the old stuff, huh?" As if the jar were a relic, a curiosity, something outdated, irrelevant. I let it hang there, an innocuous test, small yet telling, the smell of coffee mingled with faint traces of her perfume lingering in the corners. It was almost cruel the way her presence hovered, filling the space with warmth and memory, contrasting sharply against the cold, hollow routines of our children. I could see them struggling to adjust, their faces flickering with a faint unease whenever they accidentally paused too long, their smiles faltering for a heartbeat before smoothing back into practiced perfection. Amber picked up her phone again, scrolling, tapping, calculating. I deliberately mentioned something from Martha's will, casually in passing, testing the waters. "I've been going through some of Mom's old things," I said, letting the words linger like a faint shadow across the kitchen. Her jewelry box, letters. She kept them in the study. "I'll put them in order later." Amber barely glanced up. "Sure. Dad, whatever you think." But the slight tightening of her jaw betrayed her. Ryan's hand froze mid-swipe over his tablet. He looked at me briefly, a flicker of caution in his otherwise confident gaze. I noted it. The smallest reaction, the tiniest sign of worry, these were the cracks. These were the openings I would remember. Then I left a stack of letters from Martha's old correspondences on the counter, letting them be visible. I didn't say anything. I didn't comment. I simply walked to the window and stared at the rain dripping down, feeling her absence sharpen every thought, every sense. I imagined her eyes, green and discerning, watching them, judging them silently from some higher vantage. She would have seen everything they tried to hide. She would have known their motives, their excuses, their selfish calculations. And so did I. As the morning wore on, subtle frustrations began to rise. Ryan tried to take over the kitchen, arranging the dishes and cups with efficiency, but misjudged a cup, knocking it slightly against the counter. Amber rolled her eyes and corrected him, her tone sharp but forced into politeness. I watched, quiet, letting them expose themselves. Every small mistake, every slight misstep, every moment of irritation was a map, a guide, showing exactly how self-absorbed and careless they had become. And all the while, I let them think they were in control, letting them believe that breakfast, conversation, and casual gestures were enough to appease me. But I was observing, calculating, remembering every detail, every flaw, every sign of entitlement and arrogance. They thought they had returned to the home of their childhood, that their charm and polished behavior could erase the absence, the grief, the memories. They were wrong. I leaned back, taking a slow sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. Martha's kitchen, her home, still smelled like life, like love, like truth. And in that truth I saw a path they could not yet recognize. A path that would make them realize, sooner or later, that nothing about yesterday, nothing about this morning, would go unanswered. The children smiled politely, unaware of the storm growing quietly in the space between us. But I was already planning. I could see the openings, the weaknesses, the cracks in their composure. And when the time came, they would understand that neglecting Martha, dismissing her life, and underestimating me had consequences, far greater than they could imagine. By mid-morning, the tension in the house had thickened into something almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ryan and Amber moved through the kitchen with the same calculated ease, arranging the coffee cups, adjusting their phones, checking messages, pretending to care, pretending to belong. But every movement, every glance, every sigh was a performance, a hollow imitation of concern that grated against the raw, aching memory of Martha. Ryan leaned over the counter, pretending to organize the papers I had left out. "You know, Dad," he said smoothly, his eyes flicking toward the letters I had placed deliberately where he could see them. Mom always wanted things to run efficiently. She'd understand why we couldn't. I cut him off with a quiet laugh, soft but sharp, like the edge of glass against bone. "Efficiency?" I said, my voice calm but carrying a weight that made the words heavy in the air. "Is that what we're calling it now? Missing your mother's funeral because it doesn't fit the schedule?" His face tightened. The practiced mask wavered for a fraction of a second. He tried to recover. "Dad, it's complicated. Work, deals. You know how it is." I didn't nod. I didn't excuse. I only watched. Every word he spoke, every attempt to justify, was another brick in the wall of his guilt. I let the silence stretch, letting him feel it, letting Amber feel it too. Amber finally looked up from her phone, eyes bright but defensive. "We weren't heartless, Dad," she said, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "We love you." We loved Mom. But some things that are our careers, aren't flexible. She'd understand, don't you think? I set my coffee down slowly, letting the cup thump against the table. I looked at them both, really looked. Every detail of their faces, every twitch of a muscle, every flicker of discomfort that they tried to hide. "Understand?" I asked, voice low, measured, almost dangerous in its calm. "Do you think I don't understand ambition, contracts, brand deals?" "I understand it perfectly. What I don't understand is how either of you could be in this house, in this kitchen, in my life, and not feel the absence of the woman you called your mother, not feel her loss, not feel her here, in the space you occupy." Ryan's hands clenched around the edge of the counter. Amber's phone hovered mid-tap, forgotten. They were caught in the tension now. The same tension I had allowed to build over the past hours. The same tension I had let simmer since yesterday's funeral. I let them stew in it, knowing that discomfort was the first step toward awareness. Then, I began to place subtle reminders. I mentioned minor details about Martha's will, small but pointed, deliberately casual, as if they were incidental. Martha kept careful notes about everything. Her jewelry, her letters, her plans for the house. "I'll be organizing them soon," I said. I watched their faces. Ryan's jaw tightened. Amber's eyes flickered. Tiny cracks appeared in their practiced composure. Enough for me to see. I could feel my own pulse. Steady, deliberate, controlled. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but I let it stay contained. Rage, after all, is far more dangerous when measured, when patient, when it waits for the perfect moment. And this was only the beginning. Breakfast ended with silence. The bagels had gone untouched, the coffee half finished, the house filled with an uneasy stillness. Ryan and Amber moved toward the living room, pretending to chat lightly about business, about events, about anything that could fill the emptiness with noise. I followed, not in anger, not yet, but in quiet observation. Every gesture, every word, every attempt at charm was another thread in the tapestry I was weaving. By the time they settled on the couch, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They had no idea what they had walked into. They had returned to their childhood home thinking they were in control, thinking that a cup of coffee and a few hollow apologies could smooth over yesterday, could erase their absence, could erase Martha. They were wrong, and when the time came, they would realize exactly what it meant to underestimate me, to ignore the woman who raised them, to dismiss her life, to treat her funeral like an inconvenience. The consequences would be precise, calculated, and they would not see them coming until it was too late. The afternoon sun struggled through the gray clouds, casting thin shafts of light across the living room. I sat in my chair, my hands wrapped around my coffee, pretending to sip, pretending to be calm. But my mind was far from idle. Every gesture, every word, every glance from Ryan and Amber was catalogued, filed, and assessed. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and laughter, had become a stage, and I was watching them perform, unaware that the curtain was about to drop. Amber scrolled through her phone again, double-tapping photos, replying to messages, arranging her life in neat, filtered grids that left no space for reality. Ryan reviewed some documents, checking numbers, nodding as if approving a plan that mattered more than the woman lying in the ground yesterday. They were blind to the current swirling beneath their feet, blind to the storm gathering in the quiet spaces of the home. Began leaving small, deliberate notes around the house, letters from Martha's personal effects, papers I had carefully placed where they would notice them. Nothing obvious, nothing overt, just enough to pique curiosity, to make them linger, to make them start asking questions they didn't yet understand. Amber picked up one note and flicked it aside with a practiced smile, while Ryan glanced at another and muttered, "Must be old paperwork," dismissing it. But I saw the tiny hesitation in their eyes, the flicker of unease they tried to mask. That hesitation was all I needed. Lunch came and went. I made no effort to serve them, allowing them to fend for themselves. Every gesture they made, each sip of coffee, each swipe of the phone, each casual remark about their schedules only confirmed what I already knew. They were selfish, detached, and arrogant, and they had no clue how thoroughly they had miscalculated this morning, this house, this day. I walked past the mantel where Martha's picture rested, brushing my fingers lightly along the frame. Her green eyes, caught in the glass, seemed to watch the children with the disapproval only she could command. I let my gaze linger on them. I let them think the house was neutral, that I was neutral. But in truth, every move, every breath, every calculated smile was part of the quiet architecture of a plan I had been shaping since yesterday's funeral. By mid-afternoon, I began dropping hints about the house, casually mentioning things that would plant seeds of greed, curiosity, and insecurity. Martha always wanted her garden preserved exactly as it was, I said, passing by the windows overlooking the yard. There are plans she drew herself in her handwriting. I'll be going through them soon. Amber perked up slightly, eyes flicking toward the garden, while Ryan adjusted his tie, pretending to listen but clearly intrigued. I smiled inwardly. The cracks were appearing. They were beginning to notice that there might be more here than they had bargained for. I set the stage carefully, ensuring that every word, every gesture, every subtle provocation landed where it would cause just the right amount of unease, without alarming them outright. They were walking into a trap, but it was invisible to them. They were being drawn in, encouraged by their own arrogance, by their belief that they could return to their mother's house and leave unscathed, unexamined, untouched, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the living room floor. I felt the first pulse of satisfaction. They were mine to observe, mine to test, mine to confront in due time. Their confidence, their superficial charm, their practiced politeness, they would all fail. And when it did, when they finally realized the consequences of their neglect, their absence, their disregard for Martha, the reckoning would be precise, inescapable, and unforgettable. I sipped my coffee and let the silence stretch, the quiet punctuated only by the soft ticking of the clock. They thought they were still in control. They had no idea that every move they made, every word they spoke, every smile they offered had been carefully noted, catalogued, and stored. They had no idea that the house, the morning, the funeral, they had all been the first acts in a story whose ending they could not imagine. And I would make sure they never forgot it. The next morning, the house felt different. The air was heavier, charged with expectation they couldn't name. Ryan and Amber moved through the rooms cautiously, glancing at the letters and notes I had left scattered everywhere. Each one was a breadcrumb leading them to questions they weren't prepared to ask, secrets they hadn't considered. The arrogance in their eyes from yesterday was gone, replaced with a faint unease, a flicker of doubt. They were beginning to realize that this day, this house, was not theirs to command. I called them into the study, the room Martha had adored, the room filled with her carefully preserved journals and plans. "Sit," I said calmly. They obeyed, still unsure, still defensive. I gestured to the desk where a stack of papers lay. "These belong to your mother. Every letter, every note, every plan she left behind. She wanted you to understand her life, her values, the way she saw the world. She wanted you to know what mattered." Amber's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for a journal. Ryan leaned closer, scanning pages with a tight jaw. I watched silently, letting the weight of silence press down on them. They were beginning to see what they had ignored, the depth of her life, the care she had taken to protect, guide, and nurture. The family they had abandoned in their pursuit of success and self-interest. "I kept them safe," I said, my voice soft, almost gentle. "I've gone through them, and I made some decisions based on what I found. Decisions I think your mother would have agreed with." Their eyes lifted, wary. "The house, the inheritance, the things you thought were yours to claim, none of it is straightforward. Every choice you made yesterday, every excuse, every absence, it has consequences." They didn't speak. They couldn't. Each word I spoke landed like a hammer, breaking the fragile veneer of control they had carried into my home. Amber's phone slipped from her fingers. Ryan's suit felt suddenly tight, stifling, as if the house itself were pressing in on them. "I've arranged things carefully," I continued, voice calm, deliberate. "You wanted to return to Martha's house, thinking it was the same place you left it, thinking life could continue as if nothing had changed. But it has changed. She is gone. And the way you treated her, the way you treated me yesterday, that has changed how things will unfold." I could see the panic beginning to creep in, faint, almost imperceptible at first, then spreading across their faces. They realized that nothing was as simple as they had imagined. Every excuse, every dismissal, every hollow gesture had been accounted for. They had misjudged me, misjudged the house, misjudged the legacy of the woman they had ignored. I transferred control of certain things that mattered to her, things that mattered to me, I said, leaning back slightly, letting the silence stretch. "You will still receive your inheritance, but it comes with conditions, responsibilities, and a reckoning that I think you are finally ready to understand. Your mother believed in respect, in care, in thoughtfulness, and she believed in consequences." Ryan's eyes darted to Amber's, and for the first time, they shared a look of genuine fear. Amber swallowed hard, her fingers clutching the journal, realizing that her carefully constructed life, the image she curated, her excuses, and her ambition, they had not protected her. They had only exposed her. I rose from my chair, walking past them slowly, letting the weight of my presence fill the room. "I have no intention of punishing you unnecessarily," I said softly. "But understand this, absence has its price. Neglect has its price, and arrogance has its price. Your mother would have wanted you to learn that before. It was too late. They didn't speak. They couldn't." And in that silence I felt a measure of peace. Martha had been honored, her memory protected. And finally, the children could see what they had lost. Not just a mother, but the guidance, love, and wisdom that came with her presence. The reckoning had arrived. And they would remember it. As I stood in the quiet study, looking at the rain streaking down the window, I felt her near, smiling faintly, knowing that the family we had been, the one that mattered, would endure. Perhaps differently, perhaps with lessons learned too late for comfort, but learned nonetheless. The storm of yesterday had passed, and in its wake, clarity remained.